Harvey used the word weird several times in our conversation, and come next summer, if just one juror feels the same way, weird, Kohberger might walk out of his trial through the front door instead of the back.
We honor the memory of the Idaho 4 by ensuring we get justice, not convictions. And when those 4 individuals passed, everybody was scrambling for answers, asking the questions: who did this, how did they do this, and why did they do this? And when Bryan was named as the suspect, there was a brief moment of calm, until people started looking into the probable cause affidavit. And this is an absolutely wild interview with a lot to talk about, and things you're going to hear today were at one point in time only said on social media. So welcome to The Point. Let's get to it.
Copyright disclaimer: under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
This interview comes from Banfield, who to my knowledge is of the mindset that more than likely Bryan did this. But listen to this right here.
So imagine my surprise when he raised doubts about whether Bryan Kohberger could have pulled off that quadruple murder by himself.
Well, look, I mean, there is a lot of evidence here that links Bryan Kohberger to this crime. That said, I just do find it weird. And this is not to say that he did or didn't do it. But Ashleigh, somebody who has never committed a murder, or as far as we know, even a crime, going to a house that has 3 levels, 6 people inside and a dog, where he would go up to the 3rd floor, 2 people go down to the 2nd floor, 2 more, knowing that there are other people in the house, and the only thing he's armed with is a knife?
1 knife, driveway full of cars, in a home with an unfamiliar layout. That's what's supposed to make sense to everybody? And if fair coverage and an open conversation is something you prefer, hit that like button and subscribe down below. Because it is possible to do what they're saying he did with that particular weapon. The problem is, it's just not probable. And has anybody entertained the idea that the sheath is a red herring to begin with? Because remember what Kathy Mabbitt said. She described multiple wound types with a very large knife. Some wounds were deep and clean, while others were described as gouges and large sections of stuff being removed. And after hearing that description, I was personally thinking that whoever did this probably carried a machete, or at the very least some type of bowie. And of course, people can unalive somebody with a K-bar. That's not the argument I'm trying to make. But that particular tool's popularity is solely based on its overall utility. It is not a one-purpose, one-design tool.
Doing that with 6 people, never having committed a crime before, knowing that one of the people in the house is a guy who's much more athletic, bigger than him, who could have heard a scream when he first, the first 2 people, and he could have overpowered him. It's a little weird, don't you think?
But I will say this. I have a theory, Harvey Levin, and that is this. If he's guilty, and I have to preface, if he's guilty of this crime, he showed up thinking there'd be 5 girls, and he didn't expect a boy to be sleeping over, a very big boy, ethanchapin. And maybe, just maybe, that stunned him. He was overwhelmed, and the battle became pitched, and that was enough for him to say, after the 3rd victim, and then suddenly a very large 4th victim, that he needed to get out of there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I hear you, but I do think that he knew that Ethan was around that house a lot, because he had the house, if you believe the prosecutors, that they have numerous, they have evidence that he had gone there numerous times and just watched the house. So it sounds like he knew the lay of the land inside, which means he knew who was there. But, you know, again, even if Ethan wasn't there, when he does this to the first person, you would assume there would be screams and that other people would wake up and see him. And unless he planned on taking everybody out of the house, somebody's going to ID this guy and it's game over. So look, again, I'm not saying he didn't do it. I'm just saying the circumstances are boldly weird here.
Exactly, but what I find odd is these people on one side of the argument want to make the claim that Bryan Kohberger allegedly stalked this home, while at the same time making the argument that there's a possibility he didn't know Ethan was going to be there. Well, if he was stalking the home, if he was over there looking at everybody who comes in and comes out, then he would have been fully aware that Ethan stayed at that home pretty regularly. So he either did or didn't stalk the home. You cannot have it both ways. And if the attorney gets up there during this trial and tries to make that particular argument, I would almost bet money that it's going to fall flat, and whatever point he's trying to make is going to miss the mark.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have always thought this. Like, if he's guilty, how is it that a PhD student in criminology could think that you could pull it off? But for the fact it's a party house, and maybe that was the equation. Any of the screaming is going to be written off as partying. And as it turns out, from some of the early affidavits, Dylan Mortensen said that she heard Kaylee, it sounded like she was playing with her dog. Likely she was being. And then she heard Xana whimpering and someone saying, it's okay, I'm here to help. And that Dylan didn't think anything of it because it's a party house and it's so noisy.
Well, okay, but it was also 4:30 in the morning when this happened. And usually that's not when the party is at high pitch.
Yes, we're aware it's a party house, but because it's a party house is the reason why it doesn't make sense to me. When you have a home that is known as a party home, you would also know that there is a very high probability a large number of people may be asleep in other areas of the home that you're not aware of. But let's dive into what Banfield said just a little bit further, because she says that there is a possibility what Dylan actually heard wasn't somebody playing with Murphy, it was somebody attacking Kaylee. So if all that is true, all that happened at around 4 a.m. But at 4:07 a.m., law enforcement is still trying to make the case that Bryan was driving his car and pulling up to the home. Now, to me personally, and I wonder if you see it the same way, but this crime almost made more sense if there was two people involved. Even if you account for the differences between timestamps from one camera to another to what Dylan's cell phone said, I would imagine that wouldn't be any different than a couple of minutes. And this is already a very, very, very tight window of attack, with Dylan clearly stating that everybody was at the home and in their bedroom or asleep, which makes this party theory even a little bit more ridiculous in my own opinion, because what college party starts with all the roommates coming from a night out on the town and sleeping a few hours and starting a party at 4 a.m. in the morning? Now, I don't personally recall Ann sitting there in court and making the case that Bryan was around that home during the time of this attack. And I understand that attorneys will say things and do things to throw people off and cast doubt, but Sy is a defense witness, who's normally a state's witness. And I know that this idea law enforcement jacked this investigation up is scary, and nobody wants to think that there's an actual person who committed this crime and they're still walking the streets. But look at what we saw very recently in the Karen Reed trial and in Alec Baldwin's trial. Errors do happen, which is why we need to ask questions. That is why we don't need to just accept what one individual says and take it as scripture. The state should always be willing to prove to the jury and everybody watching that the person they said did it. They should be prepared to answer all these questions that people are asking. And to ask these questions isn't anybody saying they want a guilty man to walk. We all just have doubt, and we want to ensure that we get justice for those four individuals. We should all be willing to accept the possibility that there may be an error here, which is why we need to look at this sheath a little closer. Yes, it's true that's Bryan's DNA on the sheath. I personally believe that is Bryan's DNA on the sheath. But that DNA isn't any type of bodily fluid or saliva or hair. It's skin cells, and I'm not going back over all those studies that prove you don't have to touch something to actually have your skin cells on that object. But I can say if you're willing to say that is Bryan Kohberger's DNA on that sheath, then that's fine. But you should be open to the possibility he didn't touch it, because that's what the science says also could happen. They are going to have to prove that he bought that K-bar. And issuing warrants to see how many times he clicked on that word or put that particular object in his digital cart doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence that they have actual proof he did purchase it and it was in his possession during the time of this attack. And I've never understood the cell phone theories online. Now, if you do, you can let me know down in the comments below. But the narratives around the cell phone theories would mean that he's the dumbest PhD student on the planet. Why on earth would he turn his phone on and off when he knows law enforcement can see him do that on his phone? They're able to pull that up. Or why would he willingly put his phone into airplane mode if he's aware that law enforcement can see he clicked that button and they can tell you the time he did it? So if you're one of those people that believe he took his phone to this crime scene, he physically turned it off or on, or put it on airplane mode, I need you to make that make sense to me. But to me personally, this is the $1 million question Bill Thompson's gonna have to answer at trial. Listen to this.
And let's talk a little more about that theory of yours about going 0 to 60 in your first murder.
Where I come from is this. My dad owned a store, and I worked in the store when I was a kid. And I remember we used to have a lot of people coming in stealing things, stealing candy. And I remember talking to my dad about it, and we would talk about the fact that people who come in and they steal candy and whatnot, that they keep graduating upward, and eventually some of them end up robbing banks. This would be like somebody in a bank in their first outing and skipping my dad's store. And for some reason, the liquor store metaphor always has stuck with me. And it's odd to me that somebody would commit a crime of this magnitude with this many people, thinking that they could do it with just a knife in the middle of the night with a 3-level house. That's pretty damn bold. Feels improbable.
We've all heard the narrative Bryan was super smart but socially awkward. We've heard rumors that he has an issue with women, and he was some type of incel, and this was an incel-driven attack. And when he became interested in Maddie and sent her messages on social media and Maddie ignored him, he just couldn't stand for it anymore. At that particular point, he had enough of all this rejection. But my only question to that is, where is this documented history of violence towards anybody? A lot of people who knew Bryan Kohberger in the past have came out and given interviews. And nobody really mentioned any legitimate aggressive behavior, in my own opinion, with the exception of that one guy who was his friend back when they were younger. And even then, what that individual was talking about was kind of nitpicky in my own opinion. And the incel theory gets shot down when you start talking about that report that came out about what happened during that pool party he attended. Because in that story, he saw a girl, he was interested in her, he came up to her, he talked to her, and he got her number. So where is the rejection coming from? And finally, if he hated women so much and he had a big problem with them, then why did he save a woman's life at his work during a previous job? On this channel, I've always said if he did it, he did it. And he should be punished. But I've personally never understood the rush to vengeance. With what's available right now, there are clear, obvious holes. And we're hearing some very odd things during these hearings as well, from both the defense and the prosecution, that should make all of us question the story surrounding this tragic incident. Of course, everything on here is alleged. Please do your own research and form your own opinion. And if I'm wrong, and I'm okay with that. You can let me know down in the comments below, because that's how an open conversation works. And we should never forget that Lady Justice is blind. Y'all be safe now.